For decades, America has tried to combat the harms of drug use primarily through banning drugs and incarcerating people who use them. But this has caused a violent underground market for drugs, increasing crime in our communities. It's caused contaminated substances, increasing overdose deaths, and it's caused incarceration to skyrocket, destabilizing families. What we're doing isn't working. Crime, death, and broken families are the collateral damage of using the criminal justice system to address the public health issue of drugs. If you're looking for a better path forward, you're in the right place. What if we changed our drug policies to prioritize life, health, harm reduction, and thriving? And what if it benefited all of us? Our criminal justice approach to drugs had a beginning, and it can have an end. Join us on the journey to end it for good. I'm Christina Dent, your host, and if you're new here, End It for Good is a nonprofit started in 2019, based in Mississippi, that invites people to support approaches to drugs that prioritize life and the opportunity to thrive. This podcast is one of the ways we do that. You can head over to episode 34 to hear my story as a conservative Christian foster mom, changing my own mind on the best path forward with drugs, and then come on back and dive in deeper. I didn't change my mind overnight, and most other people don't either. We all need time to learn, think, ask questions, and explore. Whatever your perspective is, I'm glad you're here. Let's journey together. Welcome back to the End It for Good podcast. I'm Christina Dent, your host. Really excited today to talk about Ibogaine. The more that I've talked about this, the more people have said, how do you spell that? What is that? So it's really interesting. People, once they hear about it, are really interested in it, but it's very infrequent that I come across someone who has heard of it before that doesn't actually kind of work in the space of alternative forms of addiction treatment outside of a traditional 12-step or faith-based approach. So excited to dive in today. My guest today is Juliana Mulligan. We met a couple of years ago and I heard her story and it was just so powerful to me. I had not met anybody that had ever overcome a substance use disorder with Ibogaine. Ibogaine was like brand new to me at that time also. So it's been interesting to learn about that from Juliana. She does a lot of work with it. She's a psychotherapist now. She's an Ibogaine expert. She sees Ibogaine clinics, or she sees Ibogaine patients who are preparing for the treatment or integrating the experience after the treatment virtually, who live all over the place, and also has some in-person clients who do psychotherapy in New York with her. So Juliana, welcome to the show. Excited to get to talk.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you so much for having me. This is a good time to educate people on Ibogaine because in the last few years, knowledge of it has rapidly expanded after many years of it being way far under the radar for many people. So yeah, happy to be here.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into Ibogaine, what it is, how to spell it, all the things in a minute. But first, I just want to hear your story. What brought you to the place where you even knew what Ibogaine was in the first place?
Sure. So I was an opioid user for a good portion of my 20s. And I had gone through traditional treatment to deal with that. I had been incarcerated for a while, gone to yet another treatment, done 12-step programs, methadone and Suboxone, and none of those were really helpful to me in leaving the opioids behind. I, for some reason, had always had connections to the academic side of psychedelic use. I don't know how this happened. Maybe, my dad was one of the first people to ever go to prison for LSD in 1970. So maybe I just attracted it into my life. Yeah, it's very funny. So I had a friend who was doing a lot of studying on psychedelic therapy, and she came across Ibogaine. It was maybe 2 or 3 years before I did it, and she told me about it, and I felt like, I think this is going to be the thing that I do. But at that point, I was in a position where I didn't have money to do it. My parents were at a point of being near fed up with me and me not doing well, and had already paid for me to go to rehab. And so I just didn't feel like I wanted to. It was a good time to ask them to pay for yet another treatment for me. And so I didn't go at that time, but it was always in the back of my head. And I had some periods in that 7 years of using opioids where I was able to stay off for a while, but I was never able to stay off, I think, longer than 6 months or 9 months at a time. And, a big reason for that is there's major neurochemical imbalances that arise from long-term substance use. And just staying off of an opioid does not help you heal what's going on in your dopamine and serotonin production, which are most likely not in a good shape even before using drugs. That's why people use drugs, because they don't feel good. Something is not balanced in the brain, but also in an emotional sense as well. So I was able to stay off, but it wouldn't last. And I ended up in 2010, it was, moving to Bogota, Colombia, with an ex-partner of mine, and I went there to teach English. And when I went down there, I was not using anything. And then I quickly discovered that I could buy whatever I wanted at the pharmacy with no prescription, which is not, it's not supposed to be that way there, but it was just happening. I was a foreigner with cash, so they just kind of gave me whatever I wanted. And that's like an opioid user's dream. You get all of the opioids you want, fentanyl, morphine, Dilaudid, no prescription. It was very exciting in that moment, but I quickly realized that it stops being fun pretty quickly. Your tolerance gets quite high. You're not having the euphoria. And then, biggest of all, you're dependent on a substance that you can't get off of. So it was actually having unlimited access to opioids that helped me to really feel over it, because I think a lot of people go through this. It's like, if only I had more, if only I had enough. And I finally got that, and I was miserable. And I remember just feeling so lonely and sad all of the time, and knowing that I needed to get out of this. So that's why I'm a big proponent of letting people use the drugs they want in a safe and supported way, like in Europe, where they have heroin maintenance clinics that have very high rates of success. But that's another story. So I was able to get to the point of being ready to move on. The only thing I needed to do was get past the withdrawal, which was going to be a big one because I was using high amounts of pharmaceutical fentanyl in the end. So
let's go back real quick because you're saying,
yeah.
At this point when you're using high amounts of opioids, high doses, and you're feeling sad and depressed all the time, for people who haven't been through substance use disorder, they're thinking, why would you be using drugs if they made you feel sad and depressed all the time? What did it feel like in the beginning when you first started using? What was it that kept you using?
This is I'm glad that you asked this. I'll go back. When I first tried an opioid, I was 20 years old. I had done a lot of drugs in my teenage years. I had tried almost everything. And then had a year where I was like, I need to not do this. It's not good. And then I tried, it was actually methadone, because I grew up in South Florida, and in, the early 2000s, there was a ton of pain pills on the street because of the loose restrictions around prescribing at that time. A lot of people would come to Florida to get scripts filled, and they would prescribe methadone a lot for pain. And so my first opioid was methadone, and I remember feeling, it was like the first time in my life where all of my anxiety and sadness was gone. It was like this extreme euphoria. I felt free. And so naturally, I did it that week. The next week, I thought, I want to do that again. That was incredible. And I didn't know at the time, but methadone's a long-acting opioid. So it takes days to leave your system, depending on how long you're on it. And so I was doing it once a week for a few months, and one week I didn't have it and was really sick and felt awful. So that's how that cycle started. But initially, it was like the best anti-anxiety, anti-depression drug I had ever tried. The euphoria was amazing from that. I could talk to people. I could get up in the morning and be excited for the day. I was excited to do anything. It was, some people do opioids and get nauseous and fall asleep. That was not me. And apparently 1/3 of the population of the world has that energizing euphoric effect from opioids. I'm one of those, or was. So in the beginning, it was great. And when you're on and off opioids a lot, you can kind of maintain that ability to have euphoria. But once you become a long-term daily user, it requires more and more opioids to get to that point. And eventually you just don't get there. You're just trying not to get sick. You might get a little, even in the end, maybe when it would first kick in, I would feel good, but then I would just feel kind of numb and alone.
Yeah. I think
Mhm.
it's so helpful to be reminded that everybody's baseline is different. Not everybody wakes up feeling the same way as everybody else in the world. And so for people who
Mhm.
haven't struggled with anxiety or depression, thinking, why do people use drugs? Well, you've maybe never had that feeling of waking up and feeling like I cannot cope with this day. I don't want to get out of bed. There's nothing to get out of bed for. This is purposeless and I'm so anxious about what's going to happen. And I have a friend who's a therapist and he describes it as, if you draw a line across on a board and that's baseline. Well, it's baseline for you, but for someone else, they only get to that same baseline with a drug. Like that's what they're feeling is euphoric and free and wow, I'm finally free of this like anxiety and depression might be what someone else feels like just on an average day. And if you haven't been through that experience of feeling so badly, it can be difficult for people to understand without some education that we're not talking about people just wanting to
Yeah,
feel like off the charts incredible. For a lot of people, it's
no.
all they're just feeling normal. That's what feels euphoric is just to feel what some of the rest of us might describe as feeling normal, just feeling like,
Yeah.
hey, I can do my life and it's good.
Yeah, I mean, there's many reasons why we all have different brain chemistry going on. But we do. Each of our bodies is very different. We're not all given the same levels of dopamine and serotonin and and most importantly, we're not all living the same lives. I mean, trauma makes a huge impact in how we function. And I will tell you this, every single person in the world has a legitimate reason for using a substance or engaging in a destructive behavior. It's never for no reason. It's to address something. It's to be able to function in the world. Every single person I work with has done drugs so that they can function within this society. That's what's going on. I was barely able to function because of the overwhelming anxiety and dread that I felt every day. And opioids helped me to overcome that. So I think that's really important to remember is there is always a valid reason why people are doing what they're doing. And it's about getting underneath and understanding what that is. Because actually the substance use is not the problem. It's what's going on underneath. Everyone wants to put the blame on the substance and we just need to eradicate fentanyl and we need to get rid of drugs. That actually would not address what's going on underneath for people. There's something about our society that is making people miserable. It's not, people are not feeling taken care of and supported in this society. That is the problem. It's a societal sickness. It is not an individual illness. Addiction is not an individual affliction. So I just want to state that there.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. So let's go back to Colombia. So you are using
Mhm.
a lot of opioids. Even you mentioned using fentanyl. That's people hear that and they're like, "Oh my gosh, that's like a death sentence." Now you were using pharmaceutical fentanyl. Yes.
Fortunately, yes, street fentanyl had not come about yet, really,
Yeah.
at that time.
So take us back to like where was the point of clarity where you said, I have done this, I have done as much as I wanted. This is not how I want to live. And then tell us about your experience getting Ibogaine
Yes.
treatment.
Sure. I also want to say that I always knew I was going to get out of opioid use. I'm fortunate enough to have grown up with a rich spiritual tradition from India in my family. And I always felt that I had a deeper purpose. I just had a hard time finding it before I did Ibogaine. So something in me knew that there was a point to all this. Like I remember being incarcerated at 22 and saying to my bunkmate, just you wait, this is going to count for something one day. Like this experience is going to have meaning. So there was something in me that knew, I just couldn't quite figure out what it was. So the point that I got to, uh, maybe, I can't remember, it was like maybe a month or 2 months before I did Ibogaine. But, I was just using by myself. I was using secretly. My partner didn't know most of the time. And it was just a really lonely, empty feeling. Then, you know, we had just gotten this cat. The cat died. I was devastated. And I just thought, like, I think Ibogaine's my only shot. Either that or I'm just going to go into the woods and detox myself. I was at my wit's end and I didn't think my parents were going to want to pay for anything again. And to my surprise, my mom was 100% on board. And my dad, and within 3 days, I had booked a flight to go to a clinic in Guatemala City. So it happened really fast. I'm really lucky with the family that I have. So that's how that happened.
So 3 days later, you get on this flight.
I get on the flight to Guatemala. So at that time, in 2011, there wasn't a ton of clinics to choose from. And there was no resources online of how to choose a safe place. I didn't fully comprehend the seriousness of the cardiac side effects that come with Ibogaine, which are completely manageable. Like just like any anesthesia medication in a hospital, there's a dosing protocol, there's a screening protocol, there's a monitoring protocol that makes those medications safe. If you don't follow them, you kill people. Same with Ibogaine. There's a protocol, you have to follow it. But I didn't know about that back then. I was just in a hurry. Like, I gotta go do this. I don't care where, And I had called a couple places, and the guy I got on the phone in Guatemala, I liked him. He was a very charismatic, engaging guy. So I thought, sure, I'll go with this place. Little did I know they were not following safety protocols in many different ways. So I went to Guatemala City. I had done the main thing that you want to do before Ibogaine is get an EKG to make sure your heart is safe to be able to handle doing Ibogaine. I did do that. They did approve that. I have nothing wrong with my heart. So I went there, and they started to dose the Ibogaine a day after I got there, which is, now I know, is way too quick. People need a lot more time to stabilize, especially when they're coming off of fentanyl, like more like a week or 10 days. So they really skipped out on that step. They ended up giving me an overdose of Ibogaine, about double the maximum of the safe amount that you should ever give anyone. And I didn't know that till the end because the guy wasn't measuring the doses. He thought he had a magical, like, shamanic ability to just feel out what to give me. These guys were like mad scientists, kind of nuts guys,
You just didn't know it at the time.
I didn't know what was going on. Now I know. And they weren't evil. They just were they were eccentric and should not have been managing a dangerous medication like this. So I ended up having the cardiac side effects from Ibogaine. And despite that happening, I woke up we had to go to the hospital because of what happened. So I remember coming to in the hospital, and suddenly, in like a moment, I saw how everything I had been through in my life made sense. I saw what my purpose was to advance Ibogaine and make it safer, one, but two, change our horrible, antiquated drug treatment system in this country and the way we understand substance use. I saw that very clearly, that's what I was meant to do. And all of the shame and guilt about what I had been through was suddenly gone because I saw how everything I'd been through had made sense. It was my training, and I still think of my opioid using years as my internship. Thanks to that moment, it's never gone away. And I knew I wasn't going to do opioids again. So there's never been a moment of risk where I could have relapsed. No, it was just done. I was just done. It was like I like took that old brain and left it behind with the Ibogaine.
So now we're going to dive into what Ibogaine is. Yes, finish this, yes. And then people are going, what in the heck did she take?
So I just want to say that this is completely avoidable. What happened to me in that treatment, I've worked in clinics and given many safe treatments where that did not happen. You have to do a medical history and a screening, and you have to have them on cardiac monitoring, and you definitely don't give them more than the maximum dose, such as I got. What happened to me is because they gave me so much, I had 6 cardiac arrests and ended up on an external pacemaker for 2 weeks. Once they turned off the pacemaker, everything is fine. Even a cardiologist I go to now says he can't believe that happened. They don't see anything. It's because Ibogaine blocks it. Without getting too nerdy and scientific, it basically stops the heart from conducting electricity in the way that it's supposed to, in high doses. But if you keep the dose in the safe range, it is totally safe. So because I had that experience, my angle was always safety and ethics working in the community. And when I went to my first Ibogaine conference a year later, I got to meet Ken Alper, the most cited Ibogaine researcher, and he helped me to really understand what had happened to me. They overdosed me. That's what happened. And that's why I'm now a consultant that helps people with training and safety and reviewing and designing of protocols because of that experience. So it was actually, in a way, great for my work that happened to me, although I don't want that to happen to anybody else and I don't recommend it. And despite that, it still worked, and I had these huge realizations about my life. So what is Ibogaine? So Ibogaine comes from this plant called Iboga that grows in Central Africa, mainly Gabon, parts of Cameroon, and parts of the Congo. It is used in a traditional indigenous religion called Bwiti as a part of their initiation ceremonies. It's a very intense psychedelic substance. It's not like mushrooms or LSD or peyote or ayahuasca. Those are hallucinogens. This is a psychedelic that is called an onergenic drug, which is a dream state drug. So the experience is very different. In Bwiti, they use it as your initiation into adulthood, but also to treat various illnesses and for other reasons. It has, besides ibogaine, many other alkaloids in its bark. It's the bark on the root of the plant. And after the French had colonized Gabon, they discovered this plant. They brought it back to a lab in France, extracted ibogaine, and initially they were using it in small doses as a kind of energy pill. Even though it doesn't quite give you energy, it does help with endurance in low doses in a way, but it didn't quite last on the market very long. There were some other explorations with it, but it kind of got shelved. Then, completely by chance, in 1962, it was sitting on the shelf of a university lab, and one of the people working in the lab asked his friend, whose name is Howard Lotzoff, if he wanted to try this weird African psychedelic substance that they had in the lab. Howard was dependent on heroin at that time. He went home, took this dose of ibogaine, having no idea what he was doing, and had a really intense psychedelic experience, and then the next day woke up, not in withdrawal, not wanting to go get heroin, and never did it again. So he obviously was astounded by that and started giving it to his friends who were also heroin users, and they were getting off heroin as well. So Howard, and he was, I think, 19 or 20 at that time, he and his wife, Norma Lotzoff, who's still alive, Norma is not Howard, they dedicated their lives to developing ibogaine into a treatment. So it's really thanks to them that we have ibogaine for substance use disorder at all. I mean, it's thanks to, first and foremost, indigenous practitioners in Central Africa, but Howard is the one who really developed it into a treatment. So by the 80s, they were doing some treatments underground in New York and also in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, ibogaine got put on Schedule 1 when the drug scheduling first came out, when Nixon first did that, because they just threw all psychedelics on Schedule 1, saying they're super dangerous and there's no research purpose or medical purpose, which has made it really difficult for our industry to get it as a treatment in the US. So they were giving treatments illegally in the US and in Amsterdam. In the early 90s, it almost succeeded going through an FDA clinical trial. It got approved, the trial got started, and then the trial got called off with no real clear explanation for why they called off the clinical trial. But during that time, clinics were running in Mexico, treatments were happening in parts of Europe. Eventually, New Zealand passed it as a legally prescribable treatment. Sao Paulo State in Brazil has it as a legally prescribable treatment. In the last 14 years since I've been connected to ibogaine, the clinic scene has really boomed. And I don't really know how many clinics there are, but I would estimate 70 to 80 around the world. And there's new ones all the time.
So when people use ibogaine, for those of us who have never used a psychedelic, it's kind of like people hear and they're like, okay, it's like comes from a plant, and then you take it and you enter this dreamlike state, and then like 12 to 24 hours later you come out, or 48 hours, and something like Juliana using opioids for years and never using them again has happened. Like, what is the experience? Do you remember the experience? Do people know what they're doing? Like, what is it like? Explain it to somebody who has never, which is hard. It's somebody told me it's like explaining like what do you say, like what peanut butter smells like. It's like, what is it? How do you explain that to somebody who's never had peanut butter before? You can't explain that. Do your best to explain to us.
Do my best. So
what is it that makes it so powerful, and what is that experience like?
Yeah, so the experience is it's like having a really intense, very vivid dream for about 10 to 12 hours. You're not asleep, but you're also not really awake. Like if someone comes to tap your arm and say your name, you'll respond, but maybe 5 to 10 seconds later, because you're so immersed in an internal dream state. You're laying down with your eyes closed. Moving is really hard because Ibogaine takes away your ability to balance. It's called ataxia. So if you have to go to the bathroom, someone else to help you walk. Sitting up can even feel nauseating. It's like you're on a boat. And so you're just immersed in this dream state. And people report a whole variety of things happening. Some people do get very clear visions that they can tell you about in great detail afterwards, where they relive childhood memories. Sometimes suppressed childhood memories will come up. Some people will talk to ancestors that have passed away of theirs or relatives. Some people describe going to Africa and seeing the ceremonies that they do there with this medicine. Some people will have like a whole quest that almost sounds like a Lord of the Rings type storyline that they can tell you about. Some people will just get images that don't quite make sense, and they might never make sense of them, but they still get the big realization aha moment in the days after. It varies per person how important the visions are to their overall psychological emotional takeaway. Um, sometimes people say, I don't know, the visions didn't make sense, but I now understand why my life is the way it is. So it varies in how important it is. I didn't remember anything from mine, but I think that's because they gave me a lot of Valium. That might be why. The second time I did it years later, which was not for substance use, it I did get visions, but they were a lot of random images. It wasn't really clear what they were about. And that's just the way it is for some people. So I always say that because many people want this like big visionary experience where they're shown, they have their questions answered and the secrets revealed, and that doesn't always happen. But sometimes people do get that. And the suppressed childhood memories thing is a big one that happens. And the most common thing I hear is people are cleaning out their brains either with a broom or they're organizing filing cabinets, throwing things away. There's a lot of brain cleaning imagery that happens where you're actually in there cleaning things out, which is interesting. So the primary experience is like 10 to 12 hours, about, depending on how they space out the dosing where you go. And then there's this 24-hour period afterwards that we sometimes call a gray day. And this can be the hardest part because you're not in the experience, but you're not quite out of it and you haven't made sense of anything yet. Sometimes people don't remember anything yet. It might take them till the next day. So it's usually you're tired, because you just went to this experience all night. Things don't make sense. Sometimes people will start to feel frustrated. Oh, it didn't work. Nothing's going to work for me. And then you sleep that next night. And usually it's when you wake up after that sleep is when things start to come together. Sometimes it takes longer for certain people. Like I have worked with clients where it took a week or two for them to start feeling good. But for me, for whatever reason, coming to in the hospital, it all made sense like that. And I saw my path forward and, that. So
Even though
it's
you had no
different.
memories of what you had actually experienced, it
I
wasn't like,
felt it.
oh, I saw, interesting.
No, it was I felt it. I felt it in my body, and that's because of the work that Ibogaine does on your brain chemistry. It hits every receptor site in your brain. Dr. Alper, who I mentioned before, says we understand maybe 1% of what Ibogaine does. It's so powerful in the brain. It seems to have a restarting effect on serotonin and dopamine. It stimulates the production of something called GDNF, which is like the building blocks of the brain. And that's why people are doing it for traumatic brain injury and doing very low doses of it daily for Parkinson's disorder and other neurological conditions. It's the use in the last 10 years, we've discovered it helps with a whole host of issues. I had a client whose half of his leg was numb from a gunshot wound from years ago. And after Ibogaine, the feeling came back. We don't know how that works. There's so many miraculous things that happen that we don't fully understand yet because it hits every receptor site in your brain. So I think even if you don't remember any visions, it doesn't matter because it's like your brain got a restart. That was the best that I'd felt, probably ever in my life. Maybe as a little kid, I don't remember it, but so it's like getting a fresh brain again. So I didn't care about the visions. I saw how my life made sense and I saw the direction I was meant to go in and my purpose for being on earth, which that's the thing that that's why people keep using drugs, because they don't know why they're here. They don't feel connected. They don't feel engaged in life or connected to life. And so I had that all of a sudden. So it didn't, of course, I wasn't going to do opioids, because once you're happy being here on earth and in your body, you don't want to do drugs. And that is why substance use disorder is not a lifelong brain disease. Because once you want to be here, why are you going to try to escape?
That's good. That's helpful. I think it's helpful, especially what you just said about like helping us understand that it's doing multiple things. So you might have experiences during this dreamlike state that are very meaningful to you or that help make sense of something. It could be those sort of memory experiences, I'll just call that, even though that's probably not the right term. But it also is actually impacting the neurochemistry, maybe that's the right word, of your brain. It's not just that it's giving you these mental thoughts or experiences or memories you're coming up with. It is actually having some sort of a like you said, like it's touching all of these different parts of your brain in a very specific way that we don't quite understand yet. But I think that's helpful because as I have talked to people about it, they're like, I mean, so what? You just like go have crazy dreams and then suddenly the dreams are like, I'm better.
It's not
like,
just the dreams. Yeah, it's not just from the dreams. It's actual, like, that you have a team of construction workers that flood your brain and work on your neural pathways.
That's a good
That's a
picture.
good way to, yeah.
That's a good
And it
picture.
really, even doing a microdose of it, which I do once in a while, I get like a mini refresh. I get a new perspective on a problem that I've been struggling with, for example. So it's a really powerful substance, and I think there's applications for it that we haven't even figured out yet.
Yeah, it was really just a couple of months ago that I started hearing about all the different things that it is being used for. I don't work on traumatic brain injury, so I'm not, looking at things that are being used to help treat it. But as I was learning about Ibogaine for substance use disorder treatment, hearing about all the other things that it's being used for PTSD, for traumatic brain injury. And like you said, not everybody's going to a clinic and doing a full dose. It can also be microdosed, and there seems to be positive uses for that also, where people aren't.
Yeah, especially for Parkinson's patients that have complex health issues, they might not be able to handle a big dose. And we actually don't. The verdict is out on what the right protocol is for Parkinson's, but a lot of people have derived benefit from doing very tiny daily doses indefinitely. Like it's a dose you don't even notice. But after a few months, people start to notice a reduction in their Parkinson's symptoms.
That is so
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about your journey after that, because you have this experience of this all makes sense. My life has purpose and meaning. And you're in Guatemala, you finished this treatment, you're out of the hospital, you want to go and help the world, help more people have more access to this safely. What did you do after that?
So the one thing that my Ibogaine provider did do for me that was great is I wanted to stay and work at the clinic, and he said, go home and learn how to live your life as a functional human being for 6 months or a year before you work in Ibogaine. That was the best advice that I've gotten, hands down. Because a lot of the people in Ibogaine who didn't do that, who went directly from their own personal treatment to working in a clinic, often have an unhealthy relationship to their work because they didn't take the time to work on themselves. And so they become almost like addicted to the work, and they can't do anything else. All they've done is be a substance user or an Ibogaine provider, so they think nothing else is possible. And that's a whole other tangent I can go on about the problems that we have in the Ibogaine treatment community, with the providers themselves and their mental health struggling. So fortunately, my provider understood that to some degree and encouraged me to just go and like live as a normal person. And that was great, because that was really the first time that I lived as a functioning adult, because I've been doing opioids since the beginning of my adulthood. So I went back to the US. I moved to the Bay Area at that time because I had some friends and a sibling out there. And I got a job waiting tables. I signed up for an EMT course because I was fascinated by the cardiac aspect of Ibogaine. And initially I thought I was going to be more of a medical person with Ibogaine because I was so enthralled by this, what happened to me and trying to understand that and prevent it. So I did EMT certification. I took some EKG reading and interpreting courses. And I went to maybe 2 years after my Ibogaine treatment, I went to work in my first clinic in South Africa. So I worked in South Africa for a while, then in Costa Rica at another clinic, and then a third clinic in Mexico that does a completely different protocol, which is called the long-term low dosing protocol, which does not involve the one big dose. So I got to see 3 different styles of treatment, and I probably learned the most from the third clinic. The first 2 had big safety concerns. The third one was run by a woman named Claire Wilkins, who's the pioneer of the low dose protocol and really of Parkinson's treatment. So I learned a lot from her, and I got to understand that the medical component of Ibogaine was not going to be the best use of my skills and my talents. I didn't quite know what was. So I remember I came back to the US and was trying to figure out what to do, and I decided to go back to school to become a psychotherapist, which I realized I had been resisting because I didn't have a bachelor's degree and it was going to take forever, and I don't like things that take a long time. I am in a hurry. I want to get things done. So I had to start at square one, going through that process. Meanwhile, I was going to help with Ibogaine treatments on occasion. I also started working with people and their families before and after Ibogaine treatment. I kept doing public speaking related to Ibogaine, and eventually I started working at a center that was here in New York called the Center for Optimal Living, which was run by Dr. Andrew Tatarsky, one of the harm reduction psychotherapy leaders in the space. I ended up being able to do my clinical hours there, which was great. So my psychotherapeutic approach is informed by integrative harm reduction psychotherapy. And eventually everything has evolved to lead me to be a consultant that offers training, education, consultation, protocol design for new clinics, clinical trials in the US. Any Ibogaine related projects I have done various types of consulting for. So it's kind of evolved to be 2 things. I'm focused on the psychotherapeutic aspect of the Ibogaine treatment process, and then also the overall safety component as well. So it's like having 2 very different jobs, but they both inform each other.
Wow, that's really cool. Talk about so when I first heard your story, and then I've since heard other people's stories, but you were the first person that I had heard of who had recovered from substance use disorder with Ibogaine. I think for people that are coming from the culture most of us are familiar with in the US around treatment and recovery, there is very much an understanding and belief that the kind of recovery is hard work. Part of, and I've even heard people in recovery say, even thinking about medications for opioid use disorder feels like short circuiting. Like, no, everybody should have to do the hard work of going through withdrawal and fighting for that recovery. And, you got to make the choice every day. And like that there's something, you've got to really put in the work to recover from the trauma or whatever it is that's driving your addiction. And hearing about something where you can go and have this very short period of time experience and your life can look completely different, and you're not going to meetings for the rest of your life, you're not necessarily never using a substance again for the rest of your life, and you just are able to keep going and live again without substances. Like, for one, I think it's just mind-blowing to people. It was mind-blowing to me when I heard it. But how would you respond to people who feel like, no, that you're short-circuiting the healing process that people need to go through?
The thing is like, it's still hard work for me to work on my healing. It's just that substances are no longer an option. It's not that I fixed myself and my trauma was resolved overnight. Like that's not what I'm saying. It's just that uh my tendency towards using the coping mechanism of opioids was gone. My work on depression, the sources of my depression and anxiety, that has been ongoing, with therapy and somatic practitioners and other modalities. And Ibogaine gave me a big head start on those, but it's not that I took an easy route. And like, I have no idea how many cold turkey withdrawals I had to do. Before I lived in Colombia, I could not afford my habit. So I was in going through a cold turkey withdrawal every week. So I've paid my dues with withdrawal. Okay. Like just because I did Ibogaine, please don't tell me that I haven't done hard work. And also, even with Ibogaine, it takes away, depending on your opioid, I would say like 60 to 70% of the withdrawal. You're still uncomfortable for some weeks after that. It still takes some time. So it's not that it's completely easy, and the Ibogaine experience itself is hard. And, I think of Ibogaine not as I hate when people use the word cure or solution with Ibogaine. I think that's really misleading and sets people up for disappointment in the end. I think of Ibogaine as a door opener down the path of healing. And I think it's the best door opener by far. I mean, that was, I remember in the hospital in Guatemala thinking, this is the future of substance use disorder treatment by far. Like nothing else even comes close because of the work it does on the brain chemistry. And that's the missing piece is rehab and the recovery communities expect people to just white knuckle it through the process of coming off a substance. You're miserable. I remember making it 6 months once without opioids, and I still was miserable, anxious, and no motivation and no inspiration for life. And that is a neurochemical issue. So we cannot expect people to do well without doing work on the brain chemistry. And they might throw psych meds at the person, but that's also not really addressing the underlying issues. And then people end up on medications they don't actually need. That screws up their brain chemistry even more. Sometimes they are needed. I want to say that I don't think, medications are bad, but I think they get overused and people get diagnosed with things they don't have after coming off substances when really it's because their brain chemistry needs work and nothing does that work like Ibogaine. So it's, I don't think that you necessarily need to be struggling and I barely resist using substances every day and like that's how it's supposed to be. That's not how it's supposed to be. Like I think we all have a right to be liberated from that, and it's this whole notion that you need to just struggle. It's already been a struggle. That's why we use drugs. So like why not do something that gives you a jump start and some inspiration through the process? Yeah.
What would you tell to people who are maybe their loved one is struggling? They feel like maybe like your parents felt, we've paid for multiple things and we feel like we're sending our kid or our loved one or our brother, or sister, whatever, to the best places we can find. And just nothing is working. What would you want to share with them? Maybe they're just hearing about Ibogaine for the first time and they just feel like, oh, come on, it's just one more thing. And then we have to go out of the country to get it. It's just too much. What would you want to share with them from what you've seen from working in this field, experiencing it yourself and working in this field for as long as you have?
I mean, the best treatments in the US have probably an under 10% success rate. So you're just throwing your money away. They're not really efficacious in the long run because of what I was just talking about. It does nothing to work on the brain chemistry. So just because you've tried everything that you thought was the best doesn't mean you've tried the things that work and it didn't work. So there's that. There's also that, like, it's not just the person in the family struggling with substance use that is the issue. That person is sick because the whole family system is sick. So everybody needs to be doing their own work. Everybody should be in therapy working on their own issues because it is never just the one person's problem in the family. They ended up like that for a reason. That's another thing. But Ibogaine, what I've seen, like when I have my non-psychedelic, non-Ibogaine related therapy clients and Ibogaine clients, the progress I see is not even comparable between the clients. I mean, I have clients who are in their 60s, lifelong treatment resistant depression, lifelong suicidal ideation, suddenly are excited about their life and happy to be here and are able to enjoy themselves and say that they're not depressed. And that's massive for someone in their 60s to get there. That is a huge deal. So this is a substance that gets into the brain, works on the underlying issues, which enables people to be able to do a deep dive internally. So, I mean, I don't know what else to say other than what I've said. It's dynamite. It's really like the best, the most efficacious, highest success rate treatment that there is. The other thing I want to say though is that doing therapy and other modalities afterwards is super important. Like just Ibogaine alone is not going to be enough. If the person's going to return to the same unhealthy dynamic they were living in, it's not going to work. Like if often people think they can go back to their abusive spouse or their unhealthy family dynamic or their unhealthy friend group and expect to do well. And that's not going to work. People have to be ready to make tangible changes to their daily life. And that's why I work with people beforehand to start talking about what is going on in your daily life that isn't working. And how can we start to talk about changing that now? Because sometimes people do Ibogaine and realize they need to get out of a marriage. And that's really hard to embark on. That's like a slap in the face when you go home to deal with. So it's really important that you start working with someone beforehand and then you work with them after so that they can help you implement these major life changes. It also requires the willingness of the person. You know, if a mom calls me, I need to get my son to Ibogaine, it's like, well, what does he want to do? Is he interested? Because Ibogaine only works if the person is really dedicated. And that's why it worked for me, is because I was done. I knew I was done with opioids. I just needed to get past the withdrawal process. But when somebody is doing it for their family, it's not going to work. They have to get to a point where they're ready to do it for themselves.
That's really helpful to understand. I think one of the things I really appreciate that you're doing is kind of like hedging for reality. Instead of saying, you know, it's the miracle drug and everyone should take it, it's going to be amazing and all your problems will go away. And there's always a temptation to do that with something that you're excited about. It's just sort of kind of like oversell. And I love that you're saying
that's happening a lot in the media. You know, there's a lot of people saying it's a miracle. It is amazing. It's an incredible drug. And there is no overnight fix, you know?
Yeah.
And I have a lot of clients who watch those YouTubes and seen in the news what a miracle it is. Don't listen to me about the work you need to do afterwards. And they're really disappointed. And people relapse over the disappointment they feel that their problems aren't 100% gone. And sometimes people relapse, overdose, and die over the disappointment. So that's why managing expectations is really, really important. Ibogaine will work really hard for you if you're willing to work hard with it. It's not going to do the work for you. You have to be willing to see things. You have to be willing to self-reflect and look at hard things. And then you have to be willing to be uncomfortable afterwards, because it's still hard. You know, you skip a lot of the withdrawal, but it is still hard in that month afterwards, and sometimes longer depending on what a person's working on. But it's a lot better than a cold turkey detox and a 12-step rehab and some psych meds. I'll tell you that.
Thank you so much, Juliana. Anything else you want to leave us with? And then we'll talk about how people can get in touch with you if they're interested in learning more about your work, and we'll put links in the show notes as well. But anything else you want to leave us with?
If somebody is interested in finding a clinic, there is a guide on my website, which is innervisionibogaine.com. It's a list of questions to ask clinics to weed out the unsafe facilitators. Of course, I can't guarantee it's foolproof, but you will weed out a lot of the unsafe places using this guide. Be super careful in how you choose a facility, because the ones in Mexico, there's no regulating body. There's no way to hold these places accountable, so they're not all working safely. There's a handful that are, and I think the guide I put up will help you to find those places. The other thing is we haven't spoken about all of the state-led initiatives happening in the U.S. Texas passed legislation to start Ibogaine research. Colorado has passed legislation just to not even do research, but make the treatment available in their state. So there's exciting things happen. I don't foresee an Ibogaine treatment happening legally like next month. I think it might take a year or more to get that to happen. Hopefully sooner than that, but there's exciting things are brewing. There's a lot of research on it. There's a lot of evidence that this works. So look into it. And yeah, I'm happy to do consultations with people if they just want more information and to ask me questions.
Thanks so much, Juliana. And again, her website is innervisionibogaine.com. The link to that will be in our show notes, and you can connect with her there. And yeah, the learning journey has been super interesting for me, and encourage people to, as with all things, you should do research. You should not just go jump on a plane and take a treatment.
Don't do what I
did. Juliana's here to tell us don't do what she did. So thanks for joining us, Juliana, and thanks for listening to the podcast. And we will be back next time with more stories and people and experts. And I love it when we get all of those things in one. And Juliana is that really inspiring story from an expert, a person who has become an expert after their own experience, and is working hard to make sure that this treatment is available safely, and that people's expectations are tempered with what is possible. That Ibogaine is not miraculous, but it can be. I love the way you talked about that. The construction people unleashed on your brain, that it can be a really helpful tool and a jump start, and it will work hard for you. All of those things I think are helpful for those of us who are trying to create a new category in our minds of treatment, ways of living, ways of healing that we just have not been exposed to before here in the U.S. So thanks so much, and we'll see you next time on the End It for Good podcast.
Thanks, Christina.
So how do we shift our drug policies from a criminal justice approach to a public health approach? By inviting one person at a time to change their mind. Changed minds are the catalyst to changed laws. But many people are only willing to have this conversation when they're invited to by someone that they trust. That's you. Invite your friends, coworkers, other people in your circle of influence to consider a better way. At End It for Good, our hope is that people who hear will become people who tell. Start a conversation and join the movement to end it for good.